Right, good morning, everybody. Shall we make a start? Thanks very much, everybody, for your attendance. I'm chairing today in Ben Bradley's absence, so welcome. I think perhaps it'd be good just to go around the room and just do introductions, if that would be okay. Could we start far left? My left, anyway.
Yeah, Dave Armiger, Chief Exec, Bassett Law District Council.
John Robertson, Chief Executive, Newark and Sherwood District Council. Mike Hill, Chief Exec, Edinburgh Borough Council.
Simon Robinson, Leader of Rushcliffe Borough Council.
Catherine Evans, Service Manager Economic Growth and Property at Rushcliffe, here in place of Kath Marriott.
Andy Abrams, elected Mayor at Mansfield.
Joe Clark, Leader of Gedley.
Nikki Jenkins, Director of Economic Development and Property at Nottingham City Council, here for Mel Barrett.
Good morning, Truce Hodgkinson, Chief Executive of Ashfield District Council.
Councillor Matthew Roth, Executive Lead Member for Regeneration and Corporate Transformation at Ashfield District Council.
Councillor Milan Radulovic, Leader of Broxton Borough Council.
I'm Ruth Hyde, I'm Chief Executive of Broxton Borough Council.
Bruce Lawton, I'm Deputy Leader of Nottinghamshire County Council.
David Lloyd, Leader of Newark and Sherwood District Council.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Adrian Smith. I'm the Chief Exec at Nottinghamshire County Council.
Noel
McMenamin, the Administrator for the meeting.
Hannah Barrett, Programme Manager, Nottinghamshire County Council.
Liz Levers, Project Officer on the Devolution.
On the screen.
Hi, it's Adam Hill, Chief Executive, Mansfield District Council.
Is there somebody else as well?
Hi, it's Matt Culver. I'm the Comms and Marketing for Devolution at Nottinghamshire County Council.
Have I missed anybody out? Thank you, everybody. So can we go to the minutes of the last meeting held on the 17th of June? It might be a little bit of an issue. I think there's only two of us here who were actually at that meeting. So I think, David, it's you and me. If we agreed up the minutes, I think we're all right. Okay, you agree those? And apologies for absence.
Yes, we've apologies from Councillor Ben Bradley MP, and Councillor Bruce Lawton is substituting. Apologies also from Mel Barrett, Derek Higdon, Sajida Rose, for whom Nikki Jenkins is substituting, and Kath Marriott, for whom Catherine Evans is substituting.
Thank you, Noel. Any declarations of interest this morning from anybody? Okay, I'll hand over to Adrian now to take us through the main paper for this morning, the Joint Working and Devolution Programme. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. So you have seen this report before. Some of you were in attendance at the meeting we had a month or so ago, when unfortunately the meeting wasn't quorate, and therefore we weren't in a position to formally vote on the proposed resolutions. So we brought it back today so that we can follow through on that appropriate due diligence. With the Chairman's indulgence, I will briefly summarise what's in the report, just so that there is a context to the recommendations we're asking you to approve. So the report fundamentally is focused on allocating additional resources to run the programme for another year. And members of the Economic Prosperity Committee took the decision just over a year ago that this was a joint priority and that we should make use of the business rates pool in order to fund a team that would work on our collective behalves and help drive through the programme. I pause briefly to note that Councillor Bradley has been able to dial in.
Morning.
So, as you are aware, the County Council was asked on behalf of the partnership to host the team, and we went through a process of building and recruiting to that. I'm delighted that we've been joined by two of our colleagues from the team today. The report summarises some of the achievements that have been made as a direct consequence of the investment that you collectively chose to make, not least the securing of the devolution deal that we launched at the end of August last year. And of course, the team played a very fundamental role in ensuring we could meet the truncated timetable that was set out in agreement with the government. It's worth saying as well that the team have played a fundamental and launching the consultation, which closed in January. And without them, we wouldn't have been able to run the breadth of events and activities and the digital media engagement that we were successful with during the consultation programme. And of course, we'll provide further updates on the outcomes of the consultation in due course. And similarly, the team were fundamental in developing the proposal document, which not only formed the basis of the consultation, but will go forward to form the basis of any future proposal that we determine or you determine to make as we move the devolution programme forward. Of course, all of those things are in many respects backward looking, and so the report also gives you an indication of the activities that we would look for that team to provide should we secure your support for its funding. It's fair to say that since this report was put together at the beginning of this calendar year, some of the thinking has evolved in terms of what the programme looks like going forward, but the broad framework remains the same. So we're moving we are in a period of a preparatory period of transitional arrangements, trying to make sure that we can establish the core ingredients of a combined authority, so that should the upper tier authorities approve the revised proposal, and should the bill reach parliamentary assent, then in the summer period we would anticipate moving into shadow arrangements. That will allow us to effectively build the architecture for a combined authority and to move some elements of the combined authority into operation in anticipation of calling an election and electing a mayor for the new combined authority in May 24. So there's a huge amount of work, as you can imagine, involved in that. If you were to think about trying to build one of your organisations from scratch and all of the things that are required for it, whether that's in terms of governance and constitutional arrangements, financial architecture, or an ability to procure or commission, not least the ability to have a workforce and all of the policies, plans, systems and processes that are required to do that robustly as a public body. And the team will play a key role in driving the programme to make all of that happen. Colleagues across the partnership have been working on the proposal and the work programme that the team will fulfil, and the chief execs and the section 151 officers from the district and boroughs, county and city provide oversight of the activity that the team fulfil. We've also, through that network, provided some insight into the contributions that have been made into the wider devolution programme, not least from the City Council, but from colleagues in Derby and Derbyshire too, and perhaps we can elaborate on that if that's of interest to members of the committee. As I said, when you met previously, you offered your endorsement for the recommendations, which would in effect put £450,000 split between county council and district councils into the programme. But at this point, we're looking for your formal approval to the recommendations on page 11.
Simon.
Sorry, just a quick one on this. Where's Derbyshire's contribution on this? The Derbyshire districts and everything else. I thought this was a joint bid. From what I'm seeing here, this is just Nottinghamshire. So what are Derbyshire putting in the pot? Is it a D2N2 bid?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, gladly. So it wouldn't be for me to put all of the exact figures from partner authorities into the public domain, but we have shared that with your chief execs and section 151s. Broadly is comparative. So the two councils in Derby, the county council and the city council, have both made a combination of cash and in-kind contributions. I think it would be fair to say that the £450,000 made through our business rates pool is probably the biggest amount, but it's comparative. And I would want to also stress that We continue to have dialogue with our colleagues both at the county and indeed the district councils in Derbyshire to ensure that this is a joint endeavour and that there are comparative contributions for future years being made as well. And I know that John, in his capacity as one of our district reps on the programme board for the devolution programme, is continuing to have engagement with his peers in Derbyshire to that effect. I think one thing colleagues in Derbyshire would want to highlight is that as we entered into this programme, having previously been working separately, but then come together, we were in a position in Nottinghamshire to make use of the business rates pool, and therefore there wasn't a call on general fund revenues in any of our partner authorities. They don't have that opportunity in Derbyshire. They didn't have that opportunity in Derbyshire, so they weren't able to put the same size of investment in without a call on general fund, which is why they've approached it slightly differently to us. I don't know, John, if you want to elaborate on the conversations you've been having.
No, just to confirm that the point you've raised, Simon, has been raised with Derbyshire districts. As Adrian has just said, they don't have the same pooling arrangement as we do to draw from, but the point has been pressed home that there's an argument for equity on the part of Nottinghamshire districts and Derbyshire districts, but something that they yet to come back to us on.
Milan?
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that's concerning, has always been concerning to us, is it seems that Derbyshire's always been at least 12 months behind the situation where we are, and that gives us a little bit of concern. Do you agree? And does Adrian accept that we need to perhaps move things forward much earlier than anticipated? The shadow authority is due to be in place from April next year, as I understand. Do you believe that Derbyshire's ready for that? I don't. I'm sorry.
Well, so thank you. I can probably only offer a comment on where they are at in terms of their professional and managerial leadership. Probably better that I look to some of my colleagues, and I know Councillor Bradley's popped his hand up to talk about the politics and the political optics of that. What I would observe in the programme is at chief exec level, at corporate director level, at service director level, and in all of our various working groups, Derbyshire and Derby City are all playing an equitable role. So we have shared out the tasks amongst the 4 chief execs. We each own a portfolio in the programme, and so it cascades down into each of our organisations. I think fair to recognise as well that in terms of when we've needed to buy in external support, so for example around the Ipsos Mori work on the consultation, we shared that bill 4 ways as upper tier authorities. So I haven't seen anything less than the commitment that I would have expected from my colleagues and peers. But I think your question is perhaps as much about the politics of this than it is about the managerial response, but maybe Ben would want to comment on that.
Going down. I mean, I would just say that at leader level, we meet on a fortnightly basis, and it's rare that not all 4 leaders are there. During the consultation period, we shared consultation events crossways. I mean, I did an event with Ben, I did an event with Barry Lewis from Derbyshire, we did some with all 4 of us together, 3 of us. So at the political leadership level, I wouldn't say there's any holding back. I think it probably would be true to say that some of the feelings of some of the district councils in Derbyshire is slightly varied in terms of their level of support, but at the county and the city level there is consistent support in my experience. So I've got John and then Ben and then Matt.
Thanks, Chairman. I just wanted it in. I don't know whether I'm missing something. I had a long budget meeting last night, but what's the figure are they going to be paying in Area Wash, Derbyshire Dales, and the rest of them? They're paying nothing, and we're paying 38,000. Is that right?
I couldn't confirm that, John. What I can confirm is that we're asking you as districts to forego £38,000 from the joint business rates pool to fund the programme going forward. I don't think we've reached a point of resolution with the contribution that's coming from Derbyshire districts.
Right. It's just I find it really frustrating because we're starting from the beginning we need to be on equal terms right the way through. And as is seen, most of the districts have been stuffed over the last few years when it comes down to also some areas have got it. I'm probably grumbling because we don't get a great deal over in Gedling, but I'm also defending the right. That is a job. £38,000 is one person that we employ, and it may be that we have to take somebody out to pay for that fee. So I want to make sure it's absolutely correct before we put a nod behind it. The fact that we have done, and John's mentioned it, the forethought to get our business pool together, and I think it's absolutely a cracking piece of business we did, because that's how it enabled us. But they're not in that position. They need to learn some lessons from that. But it's going to be hard ground rules now to make sure that it is equal right the way across the board, as we'll all have, no matter if political persuasions or whatever. We're going to have all people out there who are struggling to find money to pay the bills, saying, why are you spending it on that? I do believe in the vision of devolution. I think it'll work. I think, but there are going to one or two nervous bits like this. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Ben.
Thanks, everyone. And sorry I can't be there in person this morning, but just on that point that John's made there, I think it's worth just flagging that. So the money from our perspective is obviously from the rates pool, which was historically allocated for these kinds of purposes. So it doesn't come out the general fund in that sense. It's not that you could just spend it on a member of staff if we didn't do this. Correct me if I'm wrong, officers in the room, but it has been previously allocated for this kind of purpose by all of us. I think that I would just say that this kind of final period as we run into the autumn, obviously in terms of building the organisation itself, is hugely important, because we do need that capacity to do that. But once we get into a place when the legislation is passed and when this combined authority exists formally, obviously there will have to be formal and equitable arrangements as to how that is funded, and that will have to be shared across the whole of the region from that point of view. It's only, as I say, whilst we're in this kind of informal transition period that it's slightly more difficult, but when it exists properly, these things will be written into the constitution of it and the decision making around it as to how we collectively pay for it. And a lot of that in the first instance obviously comes from central government in terms of the funding to get it set up, which we can access as and when it is set up. As I say, there's £500,000 for this financial year once it's set up, and then £1 million for the following year. On the point, just to reiterate what David said about the politics of it in terms of the balance across the region, I would just say the same, that although I fully recognise, and we've spoken in this forum a lot in the past about the difference in engagement with different districts and boroughs in Derbyshire, and I think David's right to say that I don't think their districts and boroughs feel as informed about some of this as perhaps we have had conversations, but on a practical delivery level, I would just reiterate, as I say, what David said, that we're all on the same page in terms of those meetings, in terms of officer engagement, in terms of next steps, in terms of now putting final proposals on the deal back to government in a few weeks' time. So in terms of the steps we actually need to take to get these things done, Milan, I would just say I think we are all in the same place from a kind of upper tier perspective.
Thanks, Ben. Matt.
Thank you. I think devolution will be the strongest with significant engagement from districts and boroughs, and I've said that right from the start. And I clearly still have concerns over the whole upper tier, lower tier authority split in all of this. But I am therefore significantly concerned that if we are trying to promote collaborative working, a holistic view across Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, that we're in theory, if the timeline goes right, about a year away from Purdah kicking in for the mayoral election for this combined authority. And yet we are still continuing to hold meetings separately in Nottinghamshire and separately in Derbyshire. And I don't think that's right. I think we should be coming together and as a whole area and having these conversations. And if that is then helpful to help bring the Derbyshire districts and boroughs on board, because at the minute, if the four big councils are regularly meeting and those people aren't involved, that's not going to help foster that any further and not break down that barrier of we're not being involved. That's just going to reinforce it. So I'm really keen for us to see this move forward in a positive way with everybody involved and stop meeting in separate silos. It doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, I think that's a reasonable point. I think we can work towards having more joint meetings. I think there would still need to be this separate meeting for other purposes, as well as the usefulness it is of people in Nottinghamshire getting together for issues that are particular to us. Obviously, around the launch, there were quite a lot of meetings of everybody together, but certainly if that's a shared view, we could arrange more of those meetings altogether. I think it probably would be helpful, given that I absolutely agree with you, Matt, that the involvement of districts and boroughs is crucial in the success of any devolution agreement that we launch. Andy, and then back to Ben.
Yeah, just to reinforce that point, really. I mean, I think we spoke about it more than 6 months, 9 months ago, that we said we had to catch up and work harder towards that, and we've done less. So it was like all together up to the line, and then a bit of a vacuum, really, I'd say. So we've already lost opportunity and maybe created drift, and we knew that they were kind of behind with that kind of discussions. So I think we've really got to act on that definitely sooner rather than later, because I think we've already lost opportunity to try and build closer relationships. That momentum that we seem to have we lost.
Ben?
Yeah, I don't mean to keep going over, but just to agree, really, I think we had said back in the summer, September time, that we would start to stand up that kind of joint committee type, at least information sharing session across the whole region. I think the consultation bit, where in effect we were just had a 6 week kind of 2 month period where we were just waiting for responses. Perhaps there wasn't a great deal to say in that period because it was just a kind of waiting game, but it's a shame that hasn't been stood up, and I think it should be as quickly as we can. I think it's fair, totally fair comment, and we had agreed to do that before, so the sooner we can move that forward the better. Just on the financial point again, in terms of that conversation across the board, I don't know, I know John represents districts in the kind of decision-making conversation around next steps, but just to encourage colleagues, if you have got relationships with districts and boroughs in Derbyshire, please do raise those questions and concerns with them about funding and the balance of it all, because I think it's an important thing for them to hear as well.
So would it be possible, Adrian, for you to take away with Chief Exec colleagues to try and put that into practice, and we can arrange something sooner rather than later, albeit many of us are just about to go into our own election arrangements in districts and boroughs and in the cities. But I think we should make a plan for it, certainly. For sure. Are there any other comments, Milan?
Yeah, when you look at the specifics and potential of the collaborative work programme, it's on page 17, paragraph 35, which is useful as a starting point. But what we'd like to see included in there is right at the top of there should be enhancing and protection of the natural environment. Now, you're aware of the planning and levelling up white paper, which is currently going through Parliament, which sets a great deal of emphasis on the ability for communities to be have open and accessible access to a good quality local environment. And I think that you cannot plan for things like net zero programs and waste reform, health inequalities, pool budgets, whatever, the collaborative use of public land and assets, without right at the top of that becomes the natural environment. Now, we've coped on, and I've coped on ever since like when HS2 about the Erewash Valley being the most polluted river in the country. There was an opportunity there for right the way from Ashfield right the way down to the River Trent at Attenborough, to actually bring that into, for the first time in generations, an environment that we can be proud of instead of, say, the most polluted river in the country. That needs to be driving the whole of the work programme. at the moment, if you look at what the potential areas of work are, we're out of step with their own government's thinking in terms of the planning and levelling up white paper, and the latest guidance, and particular looking at the meeting that we've just done through the DevCo, for instance, on the design code. You know, what we've also included in there is not just about the environment and health, but I wrote a whole piece on there about homes for life, adaptable homes for property for an aging population with dementia. And these are the sort of major issues that need to be tackled, because you cannot do it on an individual or piecemeal basis. They have to be done regionally, county level, district level, neighbourhood level. You know, you cannot have individual developers simply just throwing houses at the numbers. You know, it needs much more thought than that, Adrian. I hope that you'll take the opportunity with your focus group to look much more collaboratively at the environment, things like Homes for Life. They will drive the rest of the agenda. It's a construction industry that will drive the economic recovery for the next generation. You know, it won't be tourism, it won't be leisure, it will be construction. And the way we're going at the moment, it needs that holistic approach, that much wider approach, collaborative working to raise the standard and quality for people, for the homes that we build. And that will then bring, you've seen the government white paper, the so-called beautiful places, the Robert Jenrick. But I know it doesn't help having 6 Secretary of States in 5 years. But, you know, at least now we've got some consistency in the papers that they're producing. But my plea for you would be that should be the overarching way in which we proceed forward.
Do you want to respond to that, Adrian?
I think simply to thank you for the comments, and we'll make sure that we build those things in. I think we've got the hooks are there, but perhaps not sufficiently explicit. We've got work around not just net zero, but natural capital. We've got work around local nature recovery strategies, but we need to make sure that those are more prominent features in driving our work. I absolutely take that point.
No,
that's why I'm saying this, Adrian, because it's happening in a piecemeal manner. It's almost as if it's an afterthought. We're tacking on, oh, let's do something about the environment when we get a minute. You know, it needs to be driving the agenda, the clean air agenda, the quality of development and homes, access to the countryside. That needs to be driving the agenda, not the other way around. Sorry, it's just a point. I'm passionate about the ability of local authorities to build quality and set an example for the private sector. And that's what we've been trying to do in Broxton.
Point taken. Matt and then Andy.
Thank you. Yeah, and pulling up that same paragraph of 35, I'm just looking for some reassurance really around it, because it may not have been drafted in this way, but it certainly comes across in this way of being very much focused on the efforts of devolution around the activities of our existing councils. And for me, devolution is about bringing powers and money down from Westminster, not powers and money up from local authorities. And so I'm very keen to understand and potentially redraft some of that to be much more explicit and clear, because for me, the combined authority, workforce planning, completely agree, is something it should be looking at, but not in relation to councils. It should be looking in relation to the workforce across the entire region and what skill sets are needed and tackling those. It shouldn't be dealing with the issues that we as councils face. We can work together and on that, but we don't need the combined authority for that.
I think these points are all absolutely valid. I think we're in an emerging situation where the work is very much around the setting up of a devolved authority and the structures around that, with, albeit taking into account the money that's being put in, a small number of staff. And I think there is much more potential here to do more as we get through these stages. And you're right, it's not about powers going up from councils, absolutely not. It's coming down from Westminster and Whitehall, which should be the concentration. Andy?
Yeah, mine's about the 536k per district. When are we going to get it? Yeah, the retrofit, the 9 million in-year program that's mentioned, paragraph 20.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. So, as I think colleagues are aware, we've secured an opportunity to draw down some additional in-year capital as a result of this process. But that in-year capital is turning into next year capital as we go through the complicated approvals processes with government colleagues. So my understanding is over the last couple of weeks we have had another one of those capital programs approved. I'll be better able to share some of that information in the informal meeting because it hasn't had final ministerial consent. But the work on retrofit is continuing to be worked through the final committee stages internally in government, and we would expect to receive the money. And of course, that would also, its lateness would allow the money to be spent in next financial year as well. I would stress this is something that we've raised with senior officials, and I know that Councillor Bradley's also raised ministerially. Maybe that's the point he's looking to make. Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, it is really just to say we've spoken to ministers about this. I think I fed back at the last meeting that those things are coming, but slower than we'd anticipated. I think it's fair to say it's a good example actually of why this devolution agenda is so important, so that we can just have this money devolved to us to deal with ourselves rather than having to go through all these ridiculous tick box processes to draw relatively small amounts of money down. So let's get on with it from that point of view and not have to do this in the future. And just on Matt's point about the other areas, workforce and things like that, I think it kind of links to what Milan said. There are two things here. One is the powers and funds we get devolved to us, but the other is the opportunity for collaboration, and that's part of the conversation, I think, about how we build this and how we work together. That there are opportunities to do things more closely together and work more closely together on things, but that's not about doing things to councils. That's about kind of trying to work by consensus and trying to join things up where that's the right thing, and we'll all either agree or disagree on that, and we'll move forward in the areas where we agree. So I think we're already doing that. We're bringing forward some areas around procurement, for example, that's not really anything to do with devolution. It's just about as trying to work together more effectively.
Andy, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just again, it's timing and loss of opportunity. We got cost of living crisis, warm homes. The timing of the promise of the money would have been perfect. We could have been undertaking thousands of homes, well, hundreds of homes, where we could be improving the insulation, etc. The timing, would be perfect, and it links into this kind of Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire faith in the process. All these things where funding is delayed, it diminishes that kind of faith. It erodes it a bit, and that's really unfortunate. So, we really do need to put as much pressure as possible, because obviously people are cynical about changes in personnel and what happens with budgets and government, and they need something to give them the faith that we are moving in that right direction.
Bruce.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a couple of points really. One is this is obviously an enormous opportunity for us in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, and for a small amount of funding to pump prime and get this over the line, it seems to me is enormous benefit that we'll have for the residents that we all represent in Nottinghamshire. That's the first point. The second point is this my sort of like experience of partnerships. There's always one partner who has to take the lead, and generally speaking, because of other issues, that one is dragging behind slightly, and that is the case in this partnership. I'm sure Derbyshire will catch up extremely quickly and be on a level par as soon as they possibly can. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Yeah, on the point of the collaboration, I think this forum has been extremely useful in terms of helping promote and break down the barriers that have existed in the past. But I'm just a little concerned that rolling too much around collaboration into this is setting a geographical boundary on where collaboration best sits. And I don't think that's the case. I think there are different collaborations that will scale differently. There will be things that just neighbouring authorities would be best collaborating on. There are things that might be, North Nottinghamshire might be best collaborating on. It isn't always the case that the whole of Nottinghamshire or the whole of Nottinghamshire Derbyshire collaboration is the best solution. And I just don't want us to distract the focus of the combined authority from being on the big strategic stuff. This is about coming down from Westminster. I'm all for it being a forum for people meeting and breaking down that barrier between authorities to promote collaboration, but I don't think it should be necessarily the forum for that collaboration.
Okay, Dave.
Thank you, Chairman. In the first instance, could we advise Councillor Bradley he doesn't need to put his mouthpiece quite so close? I've got perforated eardrums and cardiac arrest already 3 times. But to echo the
Just
comments
checking, David.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, loud and clear, mate. Chairman, I would suggest we take these recommendations and some of the further elements we might discuss in the second part of the meeting. I'd have to say on behalf of the district, it is a difficulty to allocate a further amount when similar amounts aren't coming from all of the Derbyshire councils, and indeed, of course, the city isn't part of the pool either. However, on behalf of Newcastle Sherwood, I would iterate some of the comments we've made in the past, and I don't want us to yet again showcase why the East Midlands gets less funding than anywhere else. And it's because we don't do the hope, the optimism, an element of altruism, and some of the negotiation we need to do informally. For me, in terms of that hope, paragraph 34 is the key to it, which is discussing collaboration. So the funding here isn't just to get the combined authority off the ground and in readiness to be elected to, assuming it's approved. It's also all of our readiness to partake in it, and one assumes to draw down funding a little sooner. Now, it's no swipe or criticism of Derbyshire, but if they're a little further behind on that and or they're not putting the funding in, it will be a consequence of year 1 of the MCCA that they won't have the same level of readiness as ourselves to achieve some funding. So I'm hoping the total sort of 900k we'll have committed from the business pool will be returned in handfuls, if not spadefuls, in the first and second years of the combined authority, purely because we've worked on collaboration and readiness. And I don't think we should lose that element on collaboration, because whether it's waste or as Milan says, on the environment and new requirements coming around on nature protection, a lot of those we're going to have to look at a county and citywide basis. And it does make sense that we use a team that we're funding to start getting that readiness for it. So I don't see the funding as just being for the MCCA. And I think, therefore, I could still argue it represents the benefit to the economy and businesses as is required from the rating pool. But probably not hereafter. I would put a marker down that pool. We're lucky to have it, by the sounds of things, contrasting ourselves to others that would have to preset. But that was through design, and it is required to invest in the economy. We can argue that, but I think now, if we approve this, having removed 900,000 from it, that is sufficient. I'm a little anxious at the amount left in the volatility reserves, and being a district with power stations and others in it, I know I'm not alone in that. It is something we must preserve and increase going forward. But one assumes the team have contracts to be renewed or extended. There are imperatives on us. We probably almost certainly have to take the decision today, which I'd welcome further advice on. But I think this goes beyond altruism, as I've said. It is an investment on behalf of our residents, but certainly it's an investment on behalf of all Western councils for that readiness and preparedness to get into those early debates with the Mayor on the different streams of funds and powers that are coming down to us. Not a swipe at Derbyshire. It's a pity if they're not ready, but that would be the return on our investment speedier than theirs.
Thank you. And just to clarify, in terms of the city's contribution, so far our contribution is about £200,000 in cash and £120,000 in people's time given to the team. So hope that's not felt that we're dragging our feet either, and that's up till now. There'll be further contributions from the city as well. Simon, and then we'll move to a vote on this.
Yeah, thank you, David. I just want to try and keep this on agenda, but I think it's relevant. What's not mentioned here at all are two partners on the periphery of this who could be playing a very strategic part in this whole collaboration. Of course, that's the LEP and the Development Corporation. At some point, they've got to come into this, and they're holding big budgets, they're big commitments, but we're not talking about them at the moment. And no contribution, as far as I'm concerned. They're not budgeting for any work doing on this. And I just wonder what the group's comments were on that.
Certainly, I'm aware that there's ongoing discussions with Elizabeth and Will at the LEP in terms of the ultimate position of the LEP functions rolling into the Devolved Authority. I'm not sure in terms of finance whether there's anything to say there.
I don't think quite at this point, but of course we are keen to work with the LEP to make use of the resources and capacity that they've got as the programme progresses. Perhaps something we can again return to very shortly.
Okay, on the screen, Ben.
Just to kind of touch on that and perhaps try and answer it, David, I think the LEP is obviously at least part funded by us anyway as local authorities, and that funding inevitably will transition across into this as the LEP does, and practicalities of that we're still working through. Colleagues will know there's an ongoing kind of governance conversation about how the development company Freeport Combined Authority work together, and I think the Levelling Up Minister is seeking a conversation with some of the partners in that in the coming weeks to try and work through the practicalities of that as well. So I think the answers to some of these questions hopefully are coming our way soon.
Okay, so on page 11 of the papers, page 19, no, 11 of the report, 19 of the papers are the 4 recommendations. Can they be agreed? Those in favour? Okay. Anybody against? Okay, I think that's passed. Thank you. That's, I think, the end of the formal meeting, and the date of the next meeting is Friday the 16th of June for those of us who survived the electoral process on the 4th of May. So that's the end of that meeting. I think we go on now to an informal session, if that's okay.
If we could just stop the broadcast, please, Nathan.